All right, good morning, everybody. For those that are listening in and that are listening to this in the future, welcome. This is the Pacific Northwest team for FranNet. We have Charlie McGee in the state of Washington. We have Emily and Blair here in Oregon, in Idaho, and Alaska. So again, welcome, everybody. This is a very different, really just a conversation that the three of us are going to have in regards to what did we learn? So, excuse me. Twice a year, we have our national meeting where we meet with hundreds of franchisors. We hear from the various vendors within the franchising industry. We get the latest trends, what's happening, and we want to kind of take those learnings, summarize it for you in kind of a conversational format, and let the general public learn from us as to what's happening in the franchising industry here in the Pacific Northwest. So we chose a few concepts that we thought were kind of what everybody would want to hear. We're going to talk about financing, and correct me if I'm wrong here, gang. So again, financing, we're going to talk about the great resignation. We're going to talk about the trend that we see franchisors doing. In other words, how are they structuring themselves? And I think there's overall trends of what people are purchasing, correct?
Yeah, sounds about right.
Okay. So why don't we start off with kind of the financing piece? Because that's probably the easiest one to tackle for the three of us to chat about, but yet one of the topics that the general public's most interested in, or at least one of the most frequently asked topics. And I guess kind of the easy way to summarize the financing part is compared to springtime, which is when our last national meeting was, not a lot has changed. Now, let me describe what that means. It means that all the various sources of financing that have happened in the past are still going on. What our clients are experiencing is that the easiest source of financing is obviously if you have cash on hand. Second would be home equity line of credit. Very easy to access. You can get it within 2 to 4 weeks. It's your money. You just got to approach the bank that your mortgage is with. As long as the equity is there, you can easily access that money. It's yours to do as you please. You can do a line of credit against your personal portfolio. So that would be the third easiest way to access funds to finance your business. Works generally the same way that a home equity line of credit works. You just take a line of credit against your own personal non-qualified portfolios. In other words, non-retirement funds. After that would be what's called the ROBS program. So that's rollover for business startup. That is using retirement funds, rolling it over from a 401k into another retirement fund. And you can use those funds to fund a business without early retirement, without early withdrawal fees, and without penalties. There is a fee to set it up. There is ongoing fees to maintain it that the IRS requires. But generally, you can get that done within about 3 to 5 weeks is what we're seeing right now. And basically your retirement account becomes your own personal bank. And so it's a very advantageous way of funding your business. And like I said, it's fairly quick. After that is the way most people think of funding a business, but it's probably the hardest and longest time frame to get the money. And that is a general small business loan. There's a couple A and B categories of small business loans, which I'll chat about real quick. But the small business loans, look, I have a client right now. I want to say it's taken them at least 6 to 7 months and it's still not done. Any day now, it'll be done. But I told him and his wife, I said, hey, if we're going to go the SBA route, which they qualified for, and it will get done, expect a roller coaster ride and a long roller coaster ride. The big thing within small business loans is post-closing liquidity. So the banks want to know, do you have the proper funds on hand to take care of things at home once you start the business? And also, are you going to have ongoing income that's coming in once they fund the loan? And the banks are just being very tough on this. It's just taken a long time. They are getting done, but it is the longest. I would say probably the most expensive as far as interest rates and initial costs and everything. There is what's called an express loan, which are for loans that are $150,000 or less. But I would say, what do you think, gang? You think that's kind of a little bit harder to get now compared to a few months ago?
it's taking longer to get. My understanding is simply there are fewer banks that are interested in funding those types of loans. And so the few banks that do fund them are inundated.
Yep.
They're processing a lot of loans.
There's kind of that black hole, isn't there, between, for the few that are offering the working capital loan at 150, when you go from 150 to, really up to about 300, the number of banks interested in making those loans has really shrunk. And so, yeah, I agree. In my experience, the 7A SBA backed loan was sort of a go-to, paired with ROBS.
Right.
But these days, I mean, I got the same thing, Blair, and I've heard working with people over the last 6 months, it's just, portfolio loans have become much more popular, HELOCs, much more popular. Keep in mind with most HELOCs, what I've heard is that, they like to see two incomes. They like to see two jobs in that household. So if somebody's in career transition out of work, that's something to look at. But yeah, you're right. It's taking longer, and the banks are beat up. They are totally worn out after the PPP marathon over the last year and a half. Making those loans, and so they're behind. It's just a little trickier. If you can stay out of a loan, it's probably to your advantage.
Yeah, so I would say, that's why, at least from my clients, the vast majority of them are doing a ROBS, using their 401ks or a HELOC or a line of credit against their personal portfolios, because the 401ks are almost all-time highs. Their home equity is at almost an all-time high. Their personal portfolios are almost at an all-time high. So therefore the money's there and it's easily accessible.
Right.
Yeah, you can kind of lock in those gains.
Yeah, you can lock in those gains.
Diversify.
So again, we probably had the same message back in April at our last national meeting. So not a lot has changed in the financing world. I would say the one message that I would give to everybody who's listening to this is that the three of us are not the experts in financing. We just know a little bit to be a little bit dangerous and educate our clients a little bit. The banks and the financing companies that we work with are the experts, and they can sit down with each and every one of you as a person, look at the project that you're looking at. They are familiar with the franchisors that our clients work with. They know what it takes, and they can look at each individual and say, hey, here's the best route for financing for you personally. And here's why, based on all the other routes.
Yeah, I agree.
Agreed.
Okay.
One last thing, Blair, is that I'm not sure most people realize that most SBA loans, not all, but most of them are adjustable rate loans. It's a certain number of points above prime. And if we're looking at, and I'm not an economic forecaster, but just, in the general sphere, there's talk about, interest rates going up in the future, sometime next year, that's going to impact those loans and the servicing of those loans, where a lot of HELOCs are fixed rate. I'm not saying you can't get a fixed rate loan from a bank, but with the portfolio loans and the HELOCs, and of course it's not an issue with ROBS at all, because it's not really a loan, you're just repurposing those funds. It's another thing to consider if you're kind of thinking more long-term.
Yeah, good. All right, Charlie, you want to chat about the Great Resignation?
Sure. I was, FranNet usually has a keynote toward the beginning of the conference, giving us, we all have our anecdotal experience with what's going on in our clients and our little world. And it's always great to hear kind of more broadly what are some of the trends and what's happening out there. And so our speaker, who's kind of a psychology / business coach, well regarded, asked a question, and it was, over the last year, have you felt stagnant, apathetic, aimless, indifferent, just kind of blah? And then, you know, do you feel like your clients have felt that way? And I'm kind of thinking to myself, well, yeah, a little bit. And she said, well, then you're feeling the dominant emotion of 2021, which is languishing. And, you know, that's not a common term that, you know, people, you know, hear thrown about. But she said, you know, it's really helpful to label it. And it helps explain some of these other kind of macro trends, including the Great Resignation or the big shift. You know, why is it that people are feeling that way? Well, it kind of comes back to this overall sense of languishing, which comes from, you know, prolonged uncertainty and just kind of everything that we've all been through over the last, you know, couple of years. There's like this continuum where if you think, well, let's see, what end of the continuum? So like, let's say on this end is, you know, flourishing, where you are, you know, you're in, you know, a zone of flow. I mean, things are happening. You're feeling like you're at the top of your game. At the other end of the continuum is depression. You know, closer to that end, but not that far, is languishing. And so, you know, the takeaway from it was, you know, I guess for us personally as human beings, what it might mean for us, but just as importantly, how could we better support our clients? And things like showing more than normal levels of patience, being empathetic. You know, a couple of good questions that I, you know, took notes on from the talk was, you know, how are you really? And what are you needing to move forward? So it's basically the idea of kind of meeting the client, meeting someone where they are, and then going from there, rather than trying to get them to meet you at your, you know, higher level of engagement or kind of emotional state. Thinking that the, you know, infectious nature of your enthusiasm is going to just yank them right along. And, you know, that's not really how it works. So anyway, I found that all pretty fascinating, and I've already, you know, been kind of practicing a couple of those questions, and with good result. What did you guys think?
Well, I think it ties into what we're seeing our clients do right now. So for many, many years, our typical client was usually somebody who is in career transition, right? Not a lot of people in career transition right now. I mean, unemployment's pretty darn low. You know, a lot of employers out there are trying to keep as many of their employees as possible. So people are having this mindset of, I still want to make a change. And now's that time to make a change. And gosh, not only can I think I make a change, I can probably do it physically as well. I can actually go somewhere that I've always wanted to be and go do it. And usually the answer to be able to do that is sometimes the employer will let you, you know, move to another city and stay there. But if you can't, maybe I'll start a business. And so we're seeing a lot of clients do that and starting to prep for that either right now or for the future. So again, kind of that resignation out of corporate America into whatever they've wanted to do personally for many, many years.
Yeah, I think that's one of the silver linings that we've seen from the pandemic. And I often joke that regardless of someone's personal relationship to change, very few people like to be changed. And I think COVID changed us. I mean, a year and a half ago, the unemployment rate was going through the roof. People were losing jobs. And what I've seen over the last, you know, year and a half are people are recognizing their own resilience. And they're also recognizing, hey, some things that I took for granted were kind of swept out from under me and I didn't have any say in it. And now suddenly I have a say, like Blair, with what you said, it's like, where do I want to live? Well, I can relocate now because I can work from anywhere. Well, what kind of autonomy do I want to have? You know, starting a new business. So I'm seeing the silver lining is people are in a way proactively creating and designing the life that they want to have for themselves. You know, when I mean, gosh, look at us in the Pacific Northwest. We've had people moving to the Pacific Northwest in droves for years, but over the last, 18 months, we've got even more people coming
On
here.
steroids.
Oh gosh, it's just like, you know, it's like my adult children live here. My friends live here. I've always vacationed here. Now I live here.
Yeah, I'm surrounded from people from the Bay Area now. That never used to. They used to vacation here. Now they live here.
Yeah, I've noticed more 408 area codes around here lately.
Yeah. So I would say
says we're full.
So I would say that leads into the next topic, Emily, if you want to take this one, which is, okay, if people are kind of going through this great resignation and they have the money to do it, what are they buying? Because, that's a question that we're asked every day of our lives is, what's hot? What are the trends?
Right. Right. And up until COVID, about half of my placements, and I think I could probably guess for all of us, about half of our placements were in some type of semi-absentee ownership model or a semi-passive ownership model. What happened during COVID, when the unemployment rates were high and businesses were temporarily closed, there was a huge surge on essential services, full-time owner-operator, low cost, low overhead, essential services that could stay open and where they could create some revenue fast, even during a pandemic. So in 2020, we saw this huge surge in that. And what I'm seeing now, and I don't want to use the words new normal, because because while we're circling back to a trend that we saw pre-COVID, it addresses something that we just talked about. Now we're seeing it circle back to more interest in semi-absentee ownership models. However, I'm seeing that people are focusing on these. I would say right now, every single client that is currently in some sort of discovery or due diligence with a franchise has a full-time salaried position that they intend to keep as business owners. So the trend in a way is coming back to semi-absentee ownership, a business model that they can quietly start on the side. And kind of back to this kind of proactively creating our lives. What I'm hearing is, I want to leave my corporate position in 2, 3, 5 years. I want to have an additional revenue stream. I don't want to be dependent on this job and this one position to support me and my family. So the trend is, again, back to semi-absentee or semi-passive ownership models, but it's almost, instead of it coming from a place of fear, it's coming from a place of proactively creating the future. That's what I'm seeing.
Yeah,
I think that's fair. I mean,
Yep.
my takeaway was really the same. It's come back around. I think that, and of course we heard that you're talking about essential services, home services in particular, residential services. A lot of those brands had record 2020s, and those strong performances by their franchise system. I don't mean selling new, placing new franchisees, but the performance of their existing system year on year was extraordinary. And people have reinvested in their homes, and they're just kind of taking a different, I think, opinion on what's important to them in all sorts of different ways, and that's represented in their consumer behavior, and it's represented in their, career directions. I think, a lot of people gained a lot of weight during COVID, and the interest in, health and wellness, fitness seems to be making a furious comeback, which is, was a strong vertical for semi-absentee pre-COVID. I'd say fitness categories in general got their butts kicked during COVID. It was, difficult.
Yeah.
And now there's pent-up demand. There's been kind of a culling of the herd, if you will. There's some competitors have left the space. And so those that were strong to begin with, are really in strong positions now. And so you see, I see and have heard from the franchisors last week, or, a couple weeks ago when we had the event, not so much frozen desserts, which you heard a few years ago. It's health and wellness and physical therapy, and, people that are, really keyed in on, how can we improve our health and improve our life.
Right. Would agree. So I believe, Charlie, if you want to take on the last topic, which is basically the trend that we're seeing franchisors do. So not franchisees or our clients that are buying, but what are franchisors doing?
Yeah, well, we talked the other day about this. I think you guys have seen the same, but it was really abundantly clear during our during the event that, I can think back to like I'm showing my age, but the late 80s, the 90s, the first corporate company I worked for was one of these holding companies that had all these diversified brands in it. That trend continued in banks and so forth through the 90s, and things have just increasingly been consolidated. Technology, media, you name it. Well, guess what? The same thing is happening in franchising, where over all the, we've been doing this a long time. Blair, you've been doing this a really long time. But founder-driven concepts, think about where the franchise starts. Somebody has a business, it's a good business. They make the strategic decision to grow through franchising instead of growing as a corporate, brand where they're using their money and, building their staff. And there's plenty of great examples of those companies. But instead going franchising, and then that founder staying involved in the business and driving it and evolving, to be, because of course being a franchisor is a totally different business than being, what your founding business was. And we had a bunch of those types of concepts in our inventory. And of course that's a strategic difference for FranNet. We have a, carefully vetted inventory of franchisors that we take a very close look at before, we don't just show anything. We had a bunch of those, and it seems over time, and it really showed up this time, that they're increasingly, those founder-driven concepts are being acquired by by what are called platforms. So franchisors that have, let's say, 3 or more brands, that there's some real synergy between those brands. Some have as many as 18 different brands. Neighborly is kind of the big dog in that regard, but there were several new ones this time around. And it's interesting. I think that offers a lot of advantages for our clients, franchisees, in that that company is more well-funded, and so can invest in innovation and technology. The quality of their infrastructure is better. It's more efficient, all of which helps to better serve and support franchisees. And then also the cross-marketing and recruiting opportunities is really substantial. You end up, some of these groups really, it's like a marketing machine, because if you're in a home service category, for instance, and there's 10 other brands that are in other home service verticals, potentially you could be referring to your sister brands, your clients, in a smart, sophisticated, well-executed, CRM campaign process. And then this time, so that's been kind of coming for a while, but it, again, I saw a bunch of new ones, and there's, if you're a founder-driven franchisor, you're like, okay, who's gonna buy me? But now they're implementing stacking, and stacking is where, as a prospective franchisee, let's say you live in Bend, or you live in Bellevue, Washington, or you live in Boise, and that's your hood, that's where you are, that's where you want to build your business, and you don't really want to go to Twin Falls if you're in Boise, or if you live in Bellevue, you don't really want to have a business in Tacoma. I don't know where that would be for Ben, but so instead of scaling by adding more territory and locations in an increasingly larger geographic area, you're staying in the same area, but adding different brands from that same franchisor. And so you develop your own, you end up being your own diversified company in that particular space with shared marketing and shared administrative support and so forth. And the franchisors are developing, kind of paths to doing that, which makes sense. You're not going to start 3 brand new businesses at exactly the same time. Just like if you were doing an area development deal for one brand, you don't open all 3 at the same time. You open the first one, you get it going, you get cash flow, you use some of that cash flow to fund the next one, then you start the next one. And that smart strategic scalability is part of what, that's part of the value proposition the franchisor offers. How you can grow something quickly, efficiently, and profitably. But the stacking of using different brands seems to really be picking up steam. Even the Threshold brand wine event that we saw the other day, they're doing the same thing. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I really like the options that it provides. I know a lot of my clients that are based in Portland, if they're on the west side of Lake Oswego, they don't want to drive across the river, or my clients on the east side, they'd rather go to Vancouver, Washington before they go down to Salem. And so it provides an opportunity to really scale, take advantage of those cross-marketing systems, but instead of referring to somebody else who owns the sister brand, it's under your umbrella. And one thing, and Charlie, I think you described that eloquently, by the way. And one thing that I noticed is, so the first company that I can think of that we've worked with for years and years and years is, requires a location that offered stacking. Our candidates had to have $1 million net worth and access to, 100 in liquidity. But now I'm seeing the lower cost service-based businesses being able to provide options with stacking. So for me, what that means is that my clients that don't maybe have the net worth or the access to liquidity can still build an empire, through this stacking methodology.
Yeah.
I like the options that it provides.
Yeah. And, speaking of kind of lower, there's a continuum of financial qualification, and net worth and so forth. And that's always, of course, something important that we talk with, our clients right at the beginning. So there's a smart budget and you're kind of looking at the right types of concepts, kind of pre-qualifying sort of. But I also noticed that there's an increasing number of franchisors who will offer some in-house financing of franchise fee, of vehicles. They're particularly generous for veterans. We've got Veterans Day coming up, and I think, that's kind of on all of our minds. How can we help people go from, boots to business? And there are some concepts out there that are particularly keen on attracting veteran candidates, and that's something that can really make that easier. There, for instance,
Charlie,
one of the spaces is damage restoration.
Yeah, I was just going to say, great segue, Charlie, because I believe that is our next session. Next week, as I look at the calendar, something like that. So we'll wrap it up here. We wanted to keep it to about 20-30 minutes. So that is basically the summary from our national meeting, kind of the key takeaways. So we hope that was helpful for everybody who's listening in on this. Of course, if you have any questions or want to talk about other topics with Charlie, Emily, or myself, feel free to reach out to us personally, either our email, or you can find us on our website at www.frannet.com. And we hope you enjoyed this. Just a candid conversation amongst the 3 of us on the trends, latest, greatest things that are happening in franchising. So
great to see you guys.
Yeah, on behalf of the 3 of us, thank you, everyone. And we hope you enjoyed it.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, everyone.